All the speakers can go ahead and come on up. We have questions for most of you already. And we'll go ahead and start with some of the ones that have gotten on the list in the computer on the YouTube Live. Thank you for submitting those. Go ahead.
So one is specific about Tenderloin Housing Clinic, but is THC federal and state funded?
Is THC federal and state funded?
No, the answer is no. Okay. The others are more general. One is, I think this one came in for Abel, but what can a tenant do if they damaged their unit while experiencing a psychotic episode and were provided eviction notice for intentional damage to property?
So the tenant damaged their property while they were in a psychotic episode, and now they've received an eviction notice?
Yes.
I would take it down to the Eviction Defense Collaborative right now.
And then the other one says, can the landlord bring a third party to your rented unit, perhaps as a witness?
Yes.
Yes, they can bring a witness, a third party.
Okay.
All right. It's on.
Oh, is it on? Can you guys hear me? In Tenderloin Housing Clinic, it is supportive housing. So there are, depending on the behavior and how egregious it is, there are steps that we take before eviction. It's about eviction prevention, housing retention. So if we see a behavior, say, at our buildings, you have to sign your guests in and out. Again, we work with a very vulnerable population. It's important to know who's in our buildings. And, the decision making, it's not always there. It's not always sharp. So we got to really monitor that and keep our people safe, keep our community safe. With all that said, say this behaviors are egregious, or not terribly egregious, but it's getting there. We have tenant meetings. So the on-site case manager will talk with you and say, hey, this was not okay, and this is how you fix it. If the behavior persists, you get letters from the property manager, the supportive housing manager. You get warning letters and you get written violation notices. And you go through a process. There's tenant conferences, and then there's housing retention conferences. And that's the last step before we go to a refer to legal. So there's a lot of steps, but depending on how bad it is, on how egregious the behavior is, I can count the number of times we went straight to legal. It has to be really, really disruptive or really, really dangerous. But when it comes to like hoarding, behavior, noise complaints, property damage, just, not being respectful to the spaces, usually we give a lot of chances at Tenderloin Housing Clinic. I can only speak for Tenderloin Housing though, not for general housing.
I can actually speak for a private landlord. I used to be a property manager at a private apartment building, and we had multiple tenants with psychiatric disabilities. We also don't want things to go farther than they need to go in our particular case. And we had tenants who threatened me as the property manager, and really we just talked to your case manager because I just don't want to be in a violent situation, but I also didn't actually feel threatened, right? So it depends on the specifics, of course, whereas another tenant assaulted a police officer outside, we didn't even have to really evict them. Like that was going to be the primary thing to address. So you do, even in private spaces, there is this span of what the situation is. We want everyone to be able to like stay in their apartment. As a landlord, it's easier to keep people than find new people sometimes. Sometimes it's the opposite though, so depends. Any other questions in the room? We haven't done the room for a bit. Great.
I have a friend who was accused of hoarding, and she did stay at the Royan, and she felt like she was excessively scrutinized, and that sometimes the inspections were arbitrary. Like one inspection meeting, they would get on her case about something, but then on another occasion, it wasn't even an issue. And she got a 3-day notice for the hoarding, and she had to go find a lawyer. And Eviction Defense Collaborative couldn't provide her with a lawyer, so they recommended that she go through Homeless Advocacy Project. But it was hell for her having to deal with an arbitrary property manager. What do you do to ensure that you hire property managers who know what they're doing and who, is willing to really work with the client, not just trying to get them evicted?
Overall, we try and take a collaborative, solution-oriented approach to, and that's even our supportive housing managers. That's why they're not even called property managers, they're supportive housing managers. And the DPA, the Department of Public Health guidelines, because that's ultimately what the standard is of habitability, right? Is the clear paths I was telling you about earlier. Clear paths to the door opens at a 90-degree, clear paths to the windows, the sinks, fire detector in working order, screens on windows. These are all very straightforward, tangible, objective goals. So there shouldn't be a surprise around, it's not a matter of opinion of the property manager. It's either the unit is incompliant or it's not. And then that's when our support services team, our case managers, that's when we break it down for our tenants. And usually I work piece by piece. I pick a section of the room and I say, let's fix this first. Then we move on to different sections of the room. But you play it by ear. It's a case-to-case basis. I've had tenants who had severe hoarding and cluttering and a severe attachment disorder. And to save their housing, they just stepped aside and they said, I can't look. Can we just deep clean it? And I say, okay. And I sit with them in the hallway. We sit together and we just watch them do the deep cleaning. And, the team that, at least for Tenderloin Housing Clinic, the deep clean crew that we have we don't have, but we consult with this deep clean crew. His name's Bill, and he's super thoughtful in his approach. He saves family photos, IDs, any formal documents, anything that looks medical related or Social Security related. He'll put it in one bag. He puts personal things in another Ziploc baggie. It's very, very thoughtful. But it all depends. But regardless, the guidelines that these property managers are upholding, it's not a matter of opinion. It's very objective guidelines. And yeah.
Yeah.
So Sandra's a supportive housing manager with Tenderloin Housing Clinic.
Ultimately, this is on. Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Nobody, at least me being a supportive housing manager, we don't want to kick people out. We do really work with them. If there is an issue, there is a process for the tenant. We have a client communication form. If they're not happy with the response, can also get kicked up to a grievance. We also have visual aids to show the tenant as well, that DPH puts out. And it goes from 1 to 9, and it shows you like, okay, a 1 is great. A 9 is you definitely need a lot of help. So we can give that visual aid to show them. But all the people that we currently work in at my site, I don't work at the Ramon, and you mentioned the Royan. The Royan is in the Mission. I ultimately try my best to help people. I try to give them techniques of how to clean their place. I'm like, set a timer for 10 minutes. And if you do 10 minutes, then you're finished, cool. If you want to do another 10 minutes, go ahead, add another 10 minutes on. But a lot of times it takes a group to help you do this. And like Kristen said, we do have outside resources to help with deep cleanings. But yeah.
There is a reality just as the property manager. If I had gone by, I might have picked a different first step than the next person does for their first step. So there is going to be some human variability. I actually wanted to ask you, Joy, I know you had mentioned that one of the things you started doing was shopping a lot. Can you turn the mic on? Shopping a lot. And then next thing you knew, you had more things than you had room for. I'd love to know, what are some of the resources you've started using that help you, go back to that same pattern?
Hi. I'm extremely organized person, and everything is in containers. those Sterilite containers. And I'm I'm not like mounds of stuff. Like my situation is really an organized situation, and the general population that I hear and I adhere to is like you have mountains of stuff and everything is just disarrayed, and that's not me at all. So I want to make that very clear here that my resources are basically me just having the, and going and renting storage was one of the things that I pursued. And I'm still in the process of, getting rid of stuff. But due to the fact that I'm organized, and I did have people come aboard, and luckily did not have to pay someone, because it's all about, well, we'll help you at the time, but it's going to cost you $400 for us to bring the people, with the truck and just unload stuff. But I didn't have to go that route. I've been doing it all myself, and luckily, but this was in the past and not now. But I still have storage to get rid of, and at my age, I don't need to have storage. But as far as the resources, MHA San Francisco, which Solve is representing, that is how I learned about being a speaker for Solve, was through the hoarding and cluttering events that they had on a regular basis. And I attended those, and then I got involved in the yearly conferences that was going on and still going on, that we have every year, and listening to people reading, and just mind-setting me that you got to purge. You just can't hold on to anything. I believe that's pretty much what I did, but I didn't have to like hire help or hire. I actually had what do you call that? Supportive. It's not coming to me. The no. Something else. There was something else, and it's just not coming right now. But I was fortunate not to have, because people have to spend a lot of money. And I was very fortunate to be able to do it myself with very few people. And I also rented a U-Haul truck, and I did all that on my own. And I was a lot younger in those days also. Did that answer the question?
That was great. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. MHA, Mental Health Association. They have chapters all across the country. And so you can find one in your state, but also they have county chapters and city chapters where there's more populated areas, and they run fairly independently. So you'll have to search Google to find that. Wonderful. Did we have another question in the room? Yes.
I guess I had a question. I'm curious about maybe creative solutions for reasonable accommodations that are coming from a tenant, which I guess, for lack of a better phrase, are not reasonable. Like, for instance, like, I'm a resident services coordinator. I work separately from the property management team. If like, say a resident is requesting to move to a different apartment based on something they believe is happening and is, by all appearances, not based in reality, like, it seems that there will only be an unsatisfying conclusion to going through the reasonable accommodation process. Do you have any experiences with kind of coming to some resolution that actually works for all parties?
As someone who has tenants come to her with these unreasonable accommodations, talk about it, have dialogue about it. One example that I could think of that's super common is that they don't like their neighbor, whether the neighbor is smoking or the neighbor has an annoying voice or their dog barks too much or something like that. We talk about it. Can you guarantee that the next neighbor won't smoke? No. Can you guarantee that the next neighbor won't have an annoying voice or not, or just be annoying? No. But a big part of what we do is rooting them back into reality and the reality of the situation. And remind, at least for my buildings, I remind them that, hey, this is an apartment. Like this is a building. This is communal. You have communal spaces and we live literally right on top of each other. This is what's to be expected. You're going to hear people. You're going to hear moving around. And unfortunately, you guys are allowed to smoke. We don't advise it, but you shouldn't smoke in your unit, but you can. And that's the reality of the situation, is to talk about it. Okay, what is moving going to do? How is this going to fix the situation? And talking about what exactly is happening. I've had tenants say that they have people reaching through the walls. It's very real to them. Don't deny that reality. It is very real to them, but that's a mental health thing. And that's when we can talk more about that. How often are they reaching through the walls? What does that look like? Can you hear them? Can you see them? Can you feel them? Tell me more about that. And then that's when we loop in mental health services too.
I have we'll have 2 follow-ups to that, but if you could address this, Abel, when you add to that, or Christine, you might have something as well. For job accommodations, there's the Job Accommodation Network, which is a website you can access for free. You can call and get advice for free. Is there anything like that for housing? Any sort of resource you'd recommend to help understand what is versus isn't reasonable? Because the non-reasonable example I always hear is an elevator in a building that they can't pay for an elevator. They're actually very, very expensive. But I don't really hear a lot of other examples of what's not reasonable other than what you've shared with me. But are there any kind of resources, kind of data banks of these are things that are commonly asked for? I don't know. Yeah, that's fair.
I guess in my line of work, I get a lot of accommodations that are unreasonable. Sometimes they want the DEA to come bust the whole building and remove the whole property management system. So for me, a lot of times it continues to be focused. The discussion is, well, do you want to stay here or do you want to move? Because if that's really the problem, then you should think about moving. They almost always want to stay. So it's about finding that. But my responsibility is really to try to get my clients what they want. I'm not really looking for the best solution for them. And a lot of times it ends up being that's just something you're going to have to figure out how to live with. I have a lot of those kinds of conversations.
We'll go ahead and do your question and then we'll head across. Oh, I'm so sorry. We had Avenel, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that oftentimes a person is neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum, which is sort of a thing, where saying that they can be sensitive. I am on the autism spectrum, and having smoke next to me is a reasonable accommodation. However, it may not be a legal reasonable accommodation. And some of the things that can be helpful is, suggesting, just especially if it's noise, working with that person wearing earplugs. I have earplugs in right now. And these are things that, we have to be mindful in terms of language. Even if it's not a legal, reasonable accommodation, it is a wellness, reasonable accommodation. And so even if you move them to a different apartment, yes, there will be noise, there will be smoke. Of course, you're not supposed to smoke. But how can we work with that person so that they're able to live based on their individual needs? And that is reasonable. So, especially in housing, I do not live in an apartment. I live in a home, and I have noisemakers around my house because I just have neighbors right now who play a lot of music. And I have spoken to the landlord. It's 8 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, I think. But I also have noise machines around my home because it's my responsibility too, for my wellness in living. So I think that, as we discuss, how do we support persons over the age of 65 in living and overall wellness? We also have to consider, like, how can we support them in increasing skills and tools so that they can implement into their lives that their ask, which is reasonable ask, can assist them in increasing their wellness.
And I think Vanel actually touched upon how powerful the interactive dialogue can be, because it helps you really. Sometimes people think this is the solution to my problem, but it's, to Kristen's point, it's not always the actual solution to the actual problem. So a lot of the things that you suggested, like the noise machines, those can come up as solutions in that interactive dialogue, which is a legal phrase used in a lot of legal contexts. So that back and forth and really staying focused on what are we actually trying to solve for is where you can come to the best outcome. You had a question?
Yeah, Ellis Act evictions and extra protections disabled people have and how that actually plays out.
Can you just repeat what that was?
Question was, Ellis Act evictions, are there different protections for disabled people, and how does that usually play out?
Thank you.
So generally, what's available for disabled people in San Francisco who they're trying to get rid of, evict based on the Ellis Act, is they get more time and they get a little bit more relocation money. But other than that, there's some other stuff we can do to make it take longer and get them better deals, but it's proprietary information.
And we have, I have one up here, and then on the computer, go ahead. Yeah, we're running out of time, so we're just going to take the question in the back, and then we'll finish up with one related to making sure you pay your rent with Able. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the questions that came in through the chat is, it's very specific, I think to Kristen maybe, but can you describe how HealthLink partnership works? Are there individual referrals for HealthLink, or does a nurse or the treatment team come out weekly for home health support?
So HealthLink is just one example of one of the resources and referrals that we make. And HealthLink is an individual resource, it's an individual referral. Another example would be the Permanent Housing Advanced Clinical Services team, also known as the FACS team. And then through the UCSF Behavioral Health Roving team, that's another clinical service. That's another way to bring healthcare to the house or to the home. Unlock Institute on Aging, they send out case managers into the field, advanced social workers into the field it's awesome. They have these tablets that can load up a client's medical history, insurance info. It's amazing. But HealthLink was just one example of those resources, but there's quite a few.
Thank you. And actually, I'll close off with 211 is a tool that you can use for wherever you are in the US. You can use 211 usually, and they will start, point you in the direction of some potential resources. I will say not all resources give robust descriptions. So take a deep breath and get ready for maybe a few phone calls until you get to where you're trying to go. But other than if you don't have internet access, that would be a recommendation I would make to get started. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. It was great to have a range of things to discuss today related to psychiatric disabilities in older adults, and we appreciate your time.